The unexpected visitor. Max had always enjoyed the quiet nights in his small quarters on the edge of the space colony. It wasn't much, just a single room with a bunk, a desk filled with scattered engineering tools, and a small window that showed the endless stretch of stars outside. For Max, the solitude was comforting. He had escaped the chaos of Earth to find peace here, working as a maintenance technician on the colony. But tonight, that peace was shattered. It started with a faint sound, a hiss, barely audible, coming from the direction of the airlock to his room. Max froze, his hand pausing over the circuit board he was repairing. The airlock was supposed to be secure, accessible only with proper clearance. Who would be trying to enter his room this late at night? He glanced at the room's monitoring panel. The sensors showed nothing unusual. Frowning, Max stood up, his boots clicking softly against the metallic floor. He reached for a small multi-tool from his desk, not much of a weapon but better than nothing, and approached the airlock cautiously. The door hissed open. Max's heart skipped a beat as a figure stumbled inside, silhouetted against the dim hallway light. It was a tall woman, but not human. Her pale, silvery skin seemed to shimmer faintly, and her golden eyes glowed like embers in the dark. She wore a torn jumpsuit that looked like it had seen better days, and her breathing was ragged, almost desperate. Max opened his mouth to say something, but before he could, she stepped forward, raising a hand as if to ward him off. She spoke in a language he didn't recognize, her voice urgent and strained. Her other hand clutched a strange, cylindrical device that was sparking faintly. "Hey, wait. Who are you? What are you doing here?" Max asked, keeping his voice low but firm. His translator app, embedded in the colony's system, beeped, trying to make sense of her words. But her language was too obscure. It returned only gibberish. The woman swayed on her feet, her eyes darting around the room like she was searching for something or someone. Then, as if her strength finally gave out, she collapsed onto the floor, the strange device slipping from her grasp. "Whoa!" Max dropped to his knees beside her. Up close, he could see faint scorch marks on her jumpsuit and bruises on her arms. Whoever she was, she'd been through something dangerous. His eyes flicked to the device she'd been holding. It was small, about the size of a thermos, with glowing lines etched across its surface. Sparks of energy crackled from its ends, and the hum it emitted was growing louder. It didn't take an engineer to realize that whatever it was, it wasn't stable. "Great," Max muttered. He grabbed a pair of insulated gloves from his desk and gingerly picked up the device. The moment he touched it, the hum softened slightly, as if responding to him. He placed it on the desk and quickly grabbed a diagnostic tool, scanning it for any signs of an imminent explosion. Behind him, the woman groaned softly. Max turned back to see her golden eyes flicker open. She tried to sit up, wincing in pain, and her gaze locked onto him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she pointed weakly at the device on the desk, her expression a mix of fear and urgency. "It's gonna blow, isn't it?" Max guessed, though she probably couldn't understand him. He turned back to the device, adjusting a few settings on his tool to stabilize it temporarily. The sparks subsided and the hum quieted. Max exhaled in relief. The woman sighed, her body relaxing slightly as if she understood what he'd done. She tried to speak again, this time slower, her tone less frantic. The translator app beeped once more, finally managing to translate a single word. "Hide." Max frowned. "Hide from what?" he asked. But before he could get an answer, a faint sound reached his ears, metallic footsteps echoing down the hallway outside his room. The woman's eyes widened in alarm. She grabbed his sleeve with surprising strength, her golden eyes pleading. "Hide," the translator repeated. Max's heart raced. Whoever was outside clearly wasn't friendly. He quickly glanced around the room, trying to figure out what to do. He didn't know who this woman was or why she was here, but one thing was clear. She was in danger, and now so was he. Without a word, Max helped her up and guided her to a hidden compartment he built into the floor of his room. It was meant for storing contraband or tools he didn't want the colony inspectors to find, but it would have to do as a hiding spot. "Stay quiet," he whispered, sealing her inside. The footsteps grew louder, stopping right outside his door. Max took a deep breath, grabbed his multi-tool again, and stood in the center of the room as the airlock hissed open once more. A group of armored figures stepped inside, their faces obscured by helmets. One of them raised a glowing scanner, sweeping it across the room. The hum of the device on Max's desk was faint but present. "Where is she?" one of them demanded, their voice cold and mechanical. Max clenched his jaw. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, keeping his tone even. The figure stepped closer, the scanner's glow intensifying as it neared the desk. Max's grip tightened on his tool. This was far from the peaceful night he'd expected. A dangerous device. The silence in Max's room was suffocating after the armored figures left. He stood still, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. They hadn't found her. Not yet. But the look on their leader's face as he warned Max, "This isn't over," stuck with him. Whoever these people were, they weren't leaving without what they came for. Max released a shaky breath and unsealed the hidden compartment. The alien woman, Lyra, as she would later introduce herself, was curled up inside, her golden eyes dim but alert. She climbed out slowly, her movements stiff and cautious. "Thank you," she said, her voice heavily accented but understandable now. The translator app had finally picked up enough of her language to offer a rough interpretation. Max gave her a skeptical look, crossing his arms. "You want to tell me what's going on? Because I just lied to armed mercenaries who clearly aren't here for a friendly chat." Lyra swayed on her feet but waved off his attempt to help her. She glanced at the strange device on the desk, her expression tightening. "That is why they're here," she said, pointing at it. Max followed her gaze, frowning. The device still hummed faintly, though it was more stable now after his quick adjustments. "This thing, what is it? Some kind of weapon?" "No." Lyra hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line as if deciding how much to tell them. Finally, she said, "It's an energy converter, a prototype. It can transform any form of energy into a nearly infinite supply of power." Max blinked, his mind racing. "Wait, you're saying this thing can create unlimited energy? Like for an entire colony? Or destroy one?" Lyra said grimly, her voice dropping to a whisper. "In the wrong hands, it could be turned into a weapon powerful enough to obliterate planets." Max stared at the device, a sinking feeling settling in his gut. "And you brought it here? To my room?" His tone was sharp, but he couldn't help it. This wasn't what he'd signed up for. "I didn't have a choice," Lyra snapped, her golden eyes flashing with frustration. "They were chasing me. If I hadn't hidden, they would have it by now, and you would be dead." Max opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. She wasn't wrong. He didn't know who these mercenaries were, but they weren't the type to leave witnesses alive. Lyra moved closer to the device, her hands hovering over it like she was afraid to touch it. "I created it to help my people," she said quietly. "Our planet is dying. This was supposed to save us. But when I presented it to the council, they refused to use it. They were afraid of its potential, afraid of what it could do if it fell into the wrong hands." Max watched her, his irritation softening. There was a weight in her voice, a mixture of regret and desperation that was hard to ignore. "So, you stole it." "I didn't steal it. I built it. It's mine," she said firmly, her gaze snapping to his. "But when the council decided to destroy it, I took it and ran. I couldn't let them destroy something that could save billions of lives." Max ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "Okay, so you're telling me you're some kind of rogue scientist on the run from your government. And now these mercenaries, whoever they are, want your magic power generator to blow things up. Does that about cover it?" Lyra's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. Your summary is crude, but accurate. Great, Max muttered. Just great. The faint hum of the device caught his attention again. He stepped closer, inspecting it with a more critical eye. You said it could destroy a planet. How exactly does that work? Lyra hesitated, then gestured at the glowing lines etched across the device's surface. It converts energy by drawing it from its surroundings. If it's overloaded or tampered with, it could trigger a chain reaction, one that consumes everything around it. Fantastic, Max said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. So not only are we hiding from mercenaries, but we're sitting on a potential bomb. Lyra's expression hardened. I stabilized it. It's safe as long as no one interferes with it. Max gave her a doubtful look. Yeah, well, you'll forgive me if I'm not exactly reassured. She sighed, stepping back and leaning against the wall, her exhaustion evident. I didn't come here to involve you, human. I didn't know this was your room. But now that you are involved, I need your help. My help? Max raised an eyebrow. Lady, I'm just a maintenance tech. I fix broken pipes and rewire panels. I'm not exactly hero material. You stabilize the converter, Lyra said, her tone surprisingly gentle. That's not something just anyone could do. You're more capable than you think. Max rubbed the back of his neck, torn between wanting to kick her out and the growing realization that he couldn't. Not without condemning her, and possibly himself, to a grim fate. Fine, he said finally. But if we're doing this, we need a plan. Those mercenaries aren't going to stop until they find you, or that thing. Lyra nodded. Then we must leave the colony. As soon as possible. Max snorted. Easier said than done. Security's been tight ever since the last smuggling ring got caught. But I'll think of something. As they spoke, a faint noise reached their ears, a distant metallic clang, echoing through the colony's ventilation system. Lyra tensed, her golden eyes darting to the door. They're searching, she said. We don't have much time. Max looked at her, then at the device on the desk. His peaceful life was officially over, but something in him, a spark of curiosity, maybe even a sliver of courage, told him he couldn't turn back now. All right, he said. Let's get to work. The pursuers. The metallic clang echoed again through the vents, louder and closer this time, like the slow march of inevitability. Max froze, listening. It was the sound of something mechanical, precise, deliberate. The kind of sound that could only mean one thing. The mercenaries were sweeping through the colony, searching for Lyra and her dangerous device. They're coming, Lyra whispered, her voice tight with fear. No kidding, Max muttered, already moving to secure the door. He slammed a manual override switch, locking the airlock with a loud hiss. It wouldn't stop them for long, but it would buy a few precious minutes. Lyra stepped closer, her golden eyes scanning the room with a mix of urgency and calculation. How many exits does this room have? Just one, Max said grimly. And you just saw it. Her face darkened. Then we're trapped. Max shook his head, already pulling open a maintenance panel on the far wall. Not exactly. There's a service tunnel behind this. It's supposed to be for emergency repairs, but it runs through half the colony. Lyra watched as he yanked away the panel, revealing a narrow metal crawl space. Will it get us past the mercenaries? Max shrugged. If we're fast, maybe. If they're as thorough as I think, probably not. She hesitated, glancing at the humming device on his desk. We can't leave it behind. Max sighed. I figured as much. He grabbed the device, wrapping it in a thick insulating cloth before shoving it into a small, reinforced satchel. But if this thing blows up while we're crawling through a tunnel, I'm not going to be happy. I'll monitor it, Lyra promised. It's stable for now. Max grunted in response and gestured toward the tunnel. After you. Lyra didn't waste time. She ducked into the narrow space, moving with surprising agility for someone who had been half-conscious minutes ago. Max followed, pulling the panel back into place behind them. The crawl space was cramped and dark, the metal walls cold against his skin. The only light came from the faint glow of the emergency strips lining the tunnel. For a few minutes, the only sounds were their soft, hurried breaths and the faint hum of the device in Max's satchel. Then, faintly, they heard the sound of voices echoing down the main corridors of the colony. They were here, one voice said, distorted by the metallic walls of the tunnel. The scanner picked up traces of the converter's energy signature. Max felt his heart lurch. These mercenaries had tech far beyond anything the colony's security forces used. If they had a way to track the device, their chances of escaping were slim. "We need a decoy," Lyra whispered, as if reading his thoughts. Max thought for a moment, then reached into his tool belt and pulled out a small, outdated energy cell. He quickly adjusted its settings, making it emit a faint pulse that mimicked the converter's signature, at least to basic scanners. "This won't fool them for long," he warned as he slid it down a side tunnel. "It just needs to buy us time," Lyra said. They continued crawling, the sound of the mercenaries' boots growing fainter as they followed the decoy signal. Max exhaled in relief, but it was short-lived. Ahead of them, the tunnel split into two directions. "Which way?" Lyra asked. Max hesitated. One tunnel led toward the colony's cargo bay, where they might find a way to slip onto a freighter. The other led to the lower maintenance levels, a dead end but more isolated. "Cargo bay," Max decided. "If we're lucky, we can stow away on a ship." They turned left, crawling faster now. The narrow tunnel opened into a dimly lit storage room, filled with crates and equipment. Max pushed open the grate covering the exit and helped Lyra climb out. "We need to blend in," Max said, scanning the room for anything useful. He grabbed a couple of old maintenance uniforms from a nearby rack and tossed one to Lyra. "Put this on. We'll look like repair workers." Lyra slipped into the uniform without complaint, though it was slightly too large for her. Max did the same, adjusting the cap on his head to hide his face. As they prepared to leave the storage room, the door slid open with a hiss. Max and Lyra froze as two mercenaries stepped inside, their glowing scanners sweeping the room. Max's mind raced. If they were caught now, it was over. "Stay calm," he whispered to Lyra. Then, in a louder voice, he said, "Hey, you guys aren't supposed to be in here. This is a restricted maintenance zone." The mercenaries turned toward him, their expressions hidden behind their helmets. One of them raised a weapon. "Identify yourselves." Max gave them a bored look, the kind that only a disgruntled repair worker could master. "We're maintenance," he said, pointing to their uniforms. "Got called in for an emergency fix on the power grid." The mercenaries hesitated, glancing at each other. "There's no report of a power issue," one of them said suspiciously. "Well, I don't know what to tell you," Max said with a shrug. "We go where we're told. If you've got a problem with it, take it up with Colony Command." For a moment, Max thought they were going to call his bluff. Then, reluctantly, the mercenaries lowered their weapons. "Stay out of our way," one of them warned before they turned and left. Max waited until the door closed behind them before exhaling sharply. That was too close. Lyra nodded, her expression grim. "They won't fall for it again." "Then we need to move fast," Max said. "Let's get to the cargo bay and find a way off this rock." As they slipped out of the storage room and into the maze of corridors beyond, Max couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The mercenaries were relentless, and the device they carried was more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. But he also knew one thing for certain. If he was going to survive this, he would need to rely on more than just luck. He would need every ounce of ingenuity, every trick he had learned as an engineer. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. A desperate ally. Max and Lyra slipped into the cargo bay, their breaths shallow as they scanned the massive space. The bay was a cavernous room filled with stacked crates, looming shadows, and the hum of machinery. Massive freighters lined the loading docks, their engines idling as workers prepared for the next departure. It was the perfect place to get lost, or to be caught. "Stay low," Max whispered, guiding Lyra toward a cluster of crates near the far wall. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, but with the mercenaries still searching for them, every second counted. As they crouched behind the crates, Max leaned closer to Lyra. "We need to figure out our next move. How far does this device's signal reach?" "It's not the device they're tracking anymore," Lyra replied, her voice low but firm. "It's me." Max blinked. "You? How?" Lyra sighed, her golden eyes darting nervously toward the docked freighters. "They tagged me when I escaped the lab. A microscopic tracer embedded in my skin. I've been suppressing its signal with this," she said, holding up a small device no larger than a coin. "But it won't last much longer." Max rubbed his temples, trying to process the mess he'd been dragged into. "So let me get this straight. You're carrying a device that could destroy a planet, and you're literally a walking beacon for the people trying to kill us." Lyra's lips tightened. "I didn't ask for your help, human. You could have walked away." "Yeah, well, I didn't," Max snapped. He immediately regretted the sharpness in his tone. "Look, I'm not saying this is your fault. This is a lot, okay?" For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Lyra spoke, her voice softer. "I don't want anyone else to get hurt because of me. If you want to leave, I won't stop you." Max looked at her, his frustration melting into something closer to empathy. Despite her sharp exterior, he could see the weight she carried. The guilt, the fear, the determination to protect something bigger than herself. "I'm not leaving," he said finally. "But if we're going to survive this, we need to stick together." Lyra nodded, her expression unreadable. "Then we need to get off this colony. The tracer's signal doesn't reach far, but if they have access to the main comms network, they can boost it." Max frowned. "The comms tower. That explains why they haven't stormed the cargo bay yet. They're setting up a network-wide scan." "We need to act now," Lyra said, her urgency returning. "If they find me, they'll find the converter. And if they find the converter, they'll use it to blow up anyone who gets in their way." Max finished grimly. He glanced at the docked freighters, each one crawling with workers and automated loaders. "Okay, here's the plan. We sneak onto one of those ships, find a secure spot, and wait until we're off the colony. Once we're clear, we figure out how to get rid of that tracer." "And the mercenaries?" Lyra asked. Max hesitated. "We'll deal with them when we have to. Right now, we just need to survive." Navigating the cargo bay was easier said than done. The towering crates created a labyrinth of narrow paths, but the constant activity made it hard to move without drawing attention. Max led the way, his eyes darting between the workers and the docked freighters, searching for the best option. "There," he whispered, nodding toward a smaller ship near the edge of the bay. It wasn't as heavily guarded as the larger freighters, and its cargo ramp was down. "That one looks promising." Lyra followed his gaze. "How do you know it's leaving soon?" "I don't," Max admitted, "but it's a chance we have to take." They crept closer, sticking to the shadows as much as possible. Every step felt like an eternity, and Max's heart raced every time a worker passed too close. When they reached the base of the cargo ramp, he motioned for Lyra to wait while he checked inside. The ship's hold was cramped but mostly empty, with only a few crates stacked near the walls. Max quickly found a small alcove behind one of the larger crates and waved Lyra over. "This should keep us out of sight for now," he said. As they settled into their hiding spot, Max finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. "Okay, we're in. Now what?" Lyra glanced at the converter, which Max had placed carefully on the floor between them. "We need to stabilize this further," she said, reaching for it. "The energy levels are still too volatile." Max watched as she worked, her hands moving with practiced precision. "You're really good at this," he said, surprising himself with the compliment. Lyra didn't look up. "I've spent most of my life designing things like this. My people believe in innovation as a path to survival." Max leaned back against the crate, studying her. "So, why'd they turn on you?" "You said the council wanted to destroy the converter. They were afraid of its potential," Lyra said, her voice bitter, "afraid of what it could do if misused. But fear isn't a reason to abandon progress. I thought I could convince them, but I was wrong." Max nodded slowly. "Sounds familiar. Humans have a knack for fearing what they don't understand, too." Lyra finally looked up, her golden eyes meeting his. "And yet, here you are, helping me, even though you have no reason to trust me." Max shrugged. "Maybe I'm just an idiot." She smiled faintly. "Or maybe you're braver than you think." Before Max could respond, the ship's engines roared to life, and the cargo hold shuddered as the vessel prepared for takeoff. Max felt a flicker of hope. They'd made it. For now, at least, they were one step ahead of the mercenaries. But as the ship lifted off, Lyra's expression darkened. "They'll come for us," she said softly. "They always do." Max tightened his grip on the converter. "Let them. I'm not letting them win." The plan to escape. The freighter rattled as it broke free of the colony's gravity, the hum of its engines vibrating through the metal floor. Max and Lyra sat in a cramped space behind a towering crate, their breaths shallow as they listened for any signs of movement. The cargo hold was eerily quiet now, save for the occasional hiss of the ship's systems. "We're clear," Max said after a long pause, his voice low. "For now." Lyra nodded, but her expression remained tense. She was cradling the converter in her lap, her fingers brushing over its glowing surface like it was a fragile relic. "They won't stop," she murmured. "The moment they realize I've left the colony, they'll track this ship." Max rubbed his temples, leaning back against the cold crate. "You're full of good news, aren't you?" he said, though his tone lacked its usual sarcasm. He was too tired to argue. Lyra looked at him, her golden eyes dim but unwavering. "Do you think this is easy for me? Every decision I've made has put people in danger. My people, you, anyone who tries to help me." Max sighed, the frustration in her voice cutting through his irritation. "I get it," he said. "You're not exactly thrilled to be stuck with me either. But here we are. So let's focus on surviving, yeah?" She hesitated, then nodded. "What's your plan?" "Working on it," Max admitted. He pulled out a datapad from his tool belt and accessed the freighter's internal systems. "We need to figure out where this ship is headed. If we're lucky, it's going somewhere remote, somewhere they won't think to look for us." Lyra watched him work, her expression softening. "You're resourceful," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would be." Max smirked. "Don't sound so surprised. Humans have a habit of figuring things out when the odds are against them." The datapad pinged, displaying the ship's navigation logs. Max frowned as he read the coordinates. "Well, that's not ideal." "What is it?" Lyra asked, leaning closer. "This ship's heading to Drelka Station," Max said. "It's a major trading hub. Crowded, noisy, crawling with security and mercenaries, if I had to guess." Lyra's face fell. "They'll be waiting for us." "Not if we're smart," Max said. He tapped the datapad, pulling up a map of the station. "We need to get off this ship the moment it docks and disappear into the crowd. Once we're out of sight, we'll find a way to disable your tracker." Lyra glanced down at her wrist, where the tracer was likely embedded beneath her skin. "I can deactivate it," she said. "But I'll need a lab, proper tools, sterilizers, and equipment. I can't risk damaging it while it's still active." "Great," Max said. "We'll add breaking into a lab to our growing list of bad ideas." "It's our only option," Lyra said firmly. "If they can't track me, we'll have a chance to hide the converter somewhere safe." Max stared at her, the weight of their situation sinking in. This wasn't just about survival anymore. If they failed, the converter could fall into the wrong hands, and billions of lives could be at risk. "All right," he said finally. "Let's do this." The freighter shuddered as it docked at Drelka station, the automated systems engaging with a series of loud clanks. Max and Lyra pressed themselves deeper into the shadows, listening as the cargo bay doors hissed open and workers began unloading crates. Voices echoed through the hold, bored, routine chatter mixed with the occasional barked order. "Stay close," Max whispered to Lyra. He peeked around the edge of their hiding spot, scanning the room. The workers seemed focused on their tasks, but a group of armed guards near the entrance made his stomach twist. "They're checking every shipment," he muttered. "Looks like they're looking for someone." "Us," Lyra said grimly. Max nodded, formulating a plan. He spotted an automated loader moving crates toward a secondary exit, one that wasn't guarded. "That's our way out," he said, pointing. "We wait for the loader to pass, then follow it." Lyra followed his gaze, her eyes narrowing in thought. "What about the guards? They'll see us." Max grinned. "Not if we cause a distraction." He pulled out a small device from his tool belt, a magnetic pulse generator. "This baby will fry the power to the lights for a few seconds, just enough to make them panic." Lyra looked impressed. "You came prepared." "Like I said," Max replied, "humans are resourceful." He activated the generator, tossing it toward the far side of the cargo bay. A moment later, the lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. Shouts erupted as the workers and guards scrambled, their footsteps echoing chaotically. "Now," Max hissed, grabbing Lyra's arm and pulling her toward the loader. They moved quickly but silently, sticking to the shadows as the loader trundled toward the secondary exit. The guards were too distracted to notice as Max and Lyra slipped through the open door and into the labyrinthine corridors of Drelka station. The station was a sprawling maze of steel and neon, its crowded walkways alive with the chatter of traders, travelers, and drifters from every corner of the galaxy. Max and Lyra kept their heads down, blending into the chaos as best they could. "We need to find a lab," Lyra said, her voice barely audible over the din. Max nodded, scanning the signs overhead. Most of them advertised shops, diners, and repair bays, but one caught his eye. "Meditech Services, authorized personnel only." "There," he said, pointing. "That's our best bet." Lyra frowned. "It's restricted. How do we get in?" Max grinned. "I have a few tricks up my sleeve." As they approached the entrance, Max pulled out a small hacking tool and attached it to the access panel. The device beeped softly as it bypassed the lock, and the door slid open with a quiet hiss. "After you," Max said, gesturing for Lyra to enter. She hesitated, her golden eyes meeting his. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Max shrugged. "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this mess." As they stepped inside, the door closed behind them, sealing them in. Max couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger was just beginning. The betrayal. The sterile hum of the Meditech Lab's machinery filled the air as Max and Lyra worked quickly, their movements precise and synchronized. The room was small but packed with advanced tools, exactly what Lyra needed to extract the tracer embedded under her skin. "Hold still," Max said, watching the holographic interface as Lyra adjusted the microscopal. "If you slip, this could go south real fast." "I know," Lyra replied, her voice steady. "This isn't my first time working under pressure." Max smirked. "You've got nerves of steel. I'll give you that." Lyra didn't respond, her focus entirely on the tracer removal. The small device embedded in her wrist glowed faintly, a reminder of the constant threat it posed. Max monitored the readouts, his fingers itching with the urge to help, but he knew better than to interfere. Suddenly, the tracer emitted a sharp beep. Lyra froze, her golden eyes widening. "That's not normal." Max's stomach sank. "What does it mean?" "It's broadcasting," Lyra said, her voice tinged with panic. "Someone's forcing it to send a signal." "Can you stop it?" Max asked, his mind already racing for contingency plans. "I'm trying," Lyra said, her fingers flying over the controls. But they're overriding the failsafes. Whoever's tracking me, they're close. Max cursed under his breath, pulling out his datapad to check the station's security feed. His heart dropped when he saw a group of armed mercenaries storming the lower levels. They'd moved with purpose, their leader holding a scanner that glowed ominously. "They're here," Max said. "We need to move." Lyra's jaw tightened. "I can't leave until I disable this tracer. If they track me again, it's over." Max hesitated, then made a decision. "Finish what you're doing. I'll buy you some time." "What?" Lyra looked at him, startled. "No, you can't." "I can and I will," Max interrupted. "You're the one with the converter. You're the one they want. If I can slow them down, it'll give you a chance to finish." Lyra stared at him, a mixture of gratitude and fear in her eyes. "Be careful." Max nodded, grabbing a nearby toolbox and a small plasma cutter. "Always am." The corridors of Drelka Station were a chaotic tangle of flashing lights and overlapping voices. Max moved quickly, ducking into side passages and maintenance shafts to stay ahead of the mercenaries. His goal was simple: lead them away from Lyra. He activated the decoy signal generator he'd used earlier, amplifying the tracer's frequency to lure the mercenaries toward him. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was all he had. "They're falling for it," Max muttered, watching the security feed on his datapad. The mercenaries were converging on his position, their weapons drawn. He needed to keep them chasing him until Lyra could disable the tracer. As he rounded a corner, Max spotted a workers' service elevator. He grinned, an idea forming in his mind. He slipped inside, activating the controls to send the elevator down to the lowest level of the station. Just before the doors closed, he climbed out and hid in a nearby alcove. Moments later, the mercenaries arrived, their leader barking orders. "The signal's moving. It's heading to the lower levels." They piled into the elevator and disappeared, leaving Max alone in the corridor. He exhaled, the adrenaline still pumping through his veins. That should buy us a few minutes. But as he turned to head back to the lab, a familiar voice stopped him cold. Well, didn't expect to see you here, Max." Max froze, his blood running cold. From the shadows stepped Damon, a fellow technician from the colony. Damon had always been ambitious, too ambitious, and his presence here could only mean one thing. "You sold us out," Max said, his voice low and dangerous. Damon shrugged, a smug smile on his face. "Nothing personal, Max. But the bounty on that alien and her toy is too big to ignore. I've got bills to pay, you know." Max clenched his fists. "You don't know what you're messing with. That device, if it falls into the wrong hands." "Save the speech," Damon interrupted. "I don't care what it does. I just want my payday." Before Max could react, Damon raised a small remote. The station's security system blared to life, locking down the corridors. A synthesized voice echoed through the halls. "Station lockdown initiated. All personnel remain in designated zones." "You're not going anywhere," Damon said, his grin widening. "And neither is she." Back in the lab, Lyra worked frantically, her hands trembling as she made the final incision. The tracer sparked as she extracted it, the tiny device no bigger than a grain of rice. She crushed it underfoot, watching as its glow faded. Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. The station's lockdown alarms reached her ears, and her heart sank. "Max," she whispered. Gathering the converter, she slipped out of the lab, her movements quick and precise. She navigated the station's labyrinthine corridors, using her knowledge of engineering to bypass locked doors and avoid patrols. When she finally found Max, her breath caught. He was pinned against the wall, Damon standing triumphantly in front of him. "Let him go," Lyra said, her voice cold and commanding. Damon turned, his eyes narrowing. Ah, the alien. Right on cue. Before he could say more, Lyra raised a small device and pressed a button. A high-pitched pulse filled the air, and Damon collapsed, clutching his ears. Max staggered forward, shaking his head. "Took you long enough." Lyra smirked. "You're welcome." But their relief was short-lived. The distant sound of boots echoed through the station. The mercenaries were coming. "We need to move," Max said, grabbing her arm. "Now." As they fled into the chaos of the station, Lyra couldn't help but glance at Max, her gratitude unspoken but clear. He had risked everything for her, and she wasn't about to let his sacrifice be in vain. Humanity's strength. The cacophony of alarms and boots echoed through the labyrinthine corridors of Drelka Station as Max and Lyra sprinted toward the docking bay. The air was thick with tension. Every corner they turned feeling like it could lead straight into the mercenaries. Lyra clutched the converter tightly to her chest, its hum faint but ominous. She glanced at Max, who was running beside her, his face set with grim determination. He had risked everything to help her, a stranger from another world. She didn't understand it, but she was beginning to trust it. "They're closing in," Lyra said, her golden eyes darting to the map on Max's datavat. Max nodded, breathing hard. "We just need to reach that ship. Once we're off this station, they'll lose their advantage." "What about Damon?" she asked, her tone sharp. "He betrayed us once. He'll tell them everything." "He doesn't know where we're going," Max replied, though the doubt in his voice was clear. "Let's just focus on getting out of here." The docking bay came into view, a sprawling, chaotic expanse filled with ships of every size and type. Workers shouted orders as cargo was loaded and unloaded, and the hum of engines reverberated through the air. Max spotted their target, a small, unmarked freighter tucked near the far end of the bay. It was the kind of ship no one would look twice at, exactly what they needed. "This way," Max said, pulling Lyra toward the ship. But as they approached, a familiar voice called out, freezing them in their tracks. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" They turned to see Damon stepping out from behind a stack of crates, flanked by a squad of mercenaries. Their weapons were raised, their glowing barrels trained directly on Max and Lyra. Max's grip tightened on the tool in his hand, a modified plasma cutter he'd been carrying since they left the lab. "Damon," he said through gritted teeth, "you really can't take a hint, can you?" Damon smirked, his confidence radiating. "You've always underestimated me, Max. That was your first mistake. Your second was thinking you could outsmart these guys." He gestured to the mercenaries. "Now hand over the converter, and maybe I'll put in a good word for you." Max glanced at Lyra, whose jaw was set in defiance. "Not happening," she said firmly. Damon shrugged. "Suit yourself." Before he could give the order to fire, Max acted. He hurled a small device toward the mercenaries, a homemade EMP grenade he'd cobbled together during their escape. The device erupted in a burst of light and sound, frying their weapons and disorienting the squad. "Run," Max shouted, grabbing Lyra's arm. They bolted toward the freighter as the mercenaries struggled to recover. Behind them, Damon screamed, "Don't let them get away." The freighter's ramp was already down, and Max sprinted aboard, dragging Lyra behind him. He slammed the control panel to close the ramp, then darted toward the cockpit. "Can you fly this thing?" Lyra asked, her voice tight with urgency. "Flying's the easy part," Max said, flipping switches and powering up the engines. "Not getting shot out of the sky. That's the hard part." The freighter roared to life, its engines vibrating beneath them. Max gripped the controls, guiding the ship out of the docking bay just as the mercenaries opened fire. Blaster bolts streaked past them, one grazing the hull, but the freighter shot into open space before they could be stopped. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the hum of the ship's systems. Max leaned back in his seat, letting out a long breath. "We're clear." Lyra didn't respond. She was staring at the converter, her expression distant. "What's wrong?" Max asked, his voice softer now. "It's not over," she said quietly. "They'll come after us again. As long as this exists, We'll never be safe. Max frowned, glancing at the device. So, what do we do? Destroy it. Lyra shook her head. It's not that simple. If I destroy it, all the knowledge that went into creating it will be lost. My people need this, just not as a weapon. Max thought for a moment, then said, what if we hide it somewhere? Somewhere they'll never find it. Lyra looked at him, her golden eyes filled with doubt. And where would that be? Max smiled faintly. Earth. My home. It's not perfect, but it's a big place. And if there's one thing humans are good at, it's hiding things. Lyra hesitated, then nodded. It could work, but we'll need to dismantle it first. Scatter its components so no one can put it back together. Max leaned forward, his expression serious. Then let's do it. Together. The freighter streaked through hyperspace, carrying them toward an uncertain future. In the quiet of the cockpit, Max and Lyra worked side by side, dismantling the converter piece by piece. It was meticulous, exhausting work, but neither of them wavered. As they finished, Lyra glanced at Max. Why are you doing this? Helping me? You could have walked away so many times. Max paused, then said, because it's the right thing to do. Because someone has to stand up to people like Damon and those mercenaries. And maybe because humans and aliens aren't so different after all. Lyra smiled, a rare but genuine expression. Maybe you're right. As they prepared to scatter the converter's components across the galaxy, Max felt a strange sense of hope. The journey ahead would be dangerous, but for the first time, he wasn't facing it alone. Humanity's strength, he realized, wasn't just in its ingenuity or resilience. It was in its capacity to forge bonds, to stand together in the face of impossible odds. And in that moment, he knew they had a chance, not just to survive, but to change the future.